Two preconditioners get called multilevel. Two of them get called Schur complement methods. In the literature they sit in different chapters. In your solver config file they sit 2 lines apart, and most of the time nobody explains how they actually differ. By the end of this video you'll know exactly what a multilevel ILU does that an additive Schwarz method doesn't, why MG with an ILU smoother is not a multilevel ILU, and whether the Schur complement in your pressure solver is the same object as the Schur complement in ARMS. Every number I show you is produced by about 400 lines of Python that ships with this video. You can rerun all of it in under 2 minutes. Here's where we're going. 4 matrices, 6 preconditioners, 1 GMRES driver, 1 tolerance. Problem 1 is a mild Poisson problem. Everything works. Iteration counts between 12 and 36. Fine. Problem 2 puts a random coefficient field with 6 orders of magnitude of contrast on the same grid. ILU 0 goes from 36 to 141. Multilevel ILU goes from 15 to 29. Problem 3 is the interesting one. I've injected 80 very stiff couplings into the matrix. This is a crude model of what happens when a two-phase interface lands almost exactly on a node and your enrichment DOS gets statically condensed out. AMG with a Gauss-Seidel smoother goes from 23 iterations to 157. The same AMG hierarchy with an ILU 0 smoother goes to 15. Same coarse grids. Same interpolation. Only the smoother changed. And problem 4 is a Stokes saddle point, where ILU 0 doesn't just converge slowly, the factorization doesn't exist. 0 pivot. Same for both AMG variants. Only the multi-level ILU survives, and I'll show you exactly which line of code is responsible. 5 of 6 methods break on at least one of these. Understanding why is the whole video. Start from the only piece of algebra you need. Take any matrix, permute it, and split the unknowns into 2 groups. You get a 2x2 block form, B, F, B, C. Provided B is invertible, you can do block Gaussian elimination exactly. P at P transpose equals lower triangular, times block diagonal of B and S, times upper triangular, where S is C minus C B inverse F. That's the Schur complement. And inverting that factorization tells you something important. If you can apply B inverse and S inverse, you can apply A inverse. Exactly. No approximation anywhere. So every method in this video is an answer to 2 questions. How do I choose the split? And how do I approximate S inverse? Multilevel ILU chooses the split with a graph algorithm and approximates S by throwing away small entries and recursing. CFD chooses the split by physics and replaces S with a completely different operator that happens to have the same spectrum. Additive Schwarz refuses to make the split at all and overlaps instead. 3 answers. Same starting point. Before the details, the shape of the thing. On the left, elimination. You pick unknowns, you eliminate them exactly, and what's left over, the Schur complement, becomes the next level. The hierarchy is a consequence of elimination. Level 3 isn't a coarser grid, it's the unknowns you haven't dealt with yet. On the right, projection. You choose a prolongation operator P, and the next level is the Galerkin product RP. That level is a coarser discretization, and it's meant to represent smooth error. There's a smoother on every level whose job is the error the coarse grid can't represent. Elimination is exact and its error comes entirely from dropping. Projection is inexact by construction and its error comes from the mismatch between what the smoother removes and what the coarse space can represent. Hold that distinction. It explains almost every result later. Concretely, then. Multilevel ILU, ARM style. Step 1 is a permutation. On the left, the original matrix, a jump coefficient diffusion operator, 576 unknowns. Color is log magnitude, so you can see the coefficient jump directly in the matrix. Now find an independent set in the adjacency graph, a set of unknowns with no edges between them, and order it first. That's the middle panel. B, F, E, C. And here's the trick. Because no 2 unknowns in an independent set are coupled, B is diagonal. That's the right panel. 261 rows, and B inverse is exact, free, and perfectly parallel. Real ARMS uses block-independent sets, small aggregates with no coupling between aggregates, so B is block diagonal rather than strictly diagonal. Same idea, better for systems of PDEs where you want to keep a node's degrees of freedom together. Step 2. Form the Schur complement. Left panel, C, the block we started with, 315 by 315. Middle panel, S equals C minus EB inverse F. Notice it got denser. That's fill-in and it's unavoidable. Eliminating unknowns creates couplings between their former neighbors. If you kept all of that fill-in and recursed, you'd have a direct solver. Correct, and eventually too expensive. So, right panel. Drop entries smaller than tau times the row norm. Never drop the diagonal. That single thresholding operation is the only approximation ARMS makes. Everything else in the algorithm is exact. Say that back to yourself, because it's the cleanest way to hold the method in your head. ARMS is exact block Gaussian elimination with thresholding on the Schur complement, applied recursively. Step 3. Recurse. S becomes the matrix at the next level. Panel, A, the sizes. 576, 315, 242, 205, and here's an honest weakness of the method. The first level eliminates 45% of the unknowns. By level 4 it's down to 14%. Panel, B, shows why. Exact fill-in in gray, kept fill-in in amber. The Schur complement densifies as you go down, so independent sets get smaller, so coarsening stalls. Panel, C, makes it explicit against the 50% line a geometric coarsening would give you. Multilevel ILU builds many shallow levels. AMG builds few aggressive ones. That's a real structural difference and it shows up in memory. The variance, quickly, because the names are otherwise impenetrable. ILUM, scalar independent set, B diagonal, recurse. The original. BILUM, block independent sets. The block diagonal. ARMS, block independent sets plus dual thresholding, in the factors and in the Schur complement. ARMS DDPQ, non-symmetric permutations, chosen with a diagonal dominance weighting for strongly non-symmetric problems. Parallel ARMS, the parallel version. Split into interior and interface unknowns, and recurse on the distributed Schur complement. Note where that lands you, a Schur complement over subdomain interfaces. That is domain decomposition. The two families meet here. ILU pack, the important one for hard problems. Instead of dropping by magnitude, it monitors the growth of the inverse factors, L inverse and U inverse, and defers any row that would make them exceed a bound. That bound is the condensed parameter, typically 3 to 10 high Luxia and high fear, the modern descendants, built specifically for PDE saddle points, adding a bound on D inverse, and a rank revealing QR on the last Schur complement. MSLR replaces thresholding entirely with a low-rank correction to the Schur inverse. The throughline. Every variant is a different answer to which unknowns do I dare eliminate, and what do I do with the fill-in. One practical figure before we move on. Horizontal axis. Operator complexity, how much memory you store relative to the original matrix. Vertical, iterations. At tau equals 0, no dropping at all, you get convergence in one iteration, because it's a direct solver, at 10 times the memory. At tau equals 0.3 you're storing 16% extra and doing 55 iterations, which is worse than plain ILU 0, the dashed line. Between them it's a clean, monotone trade. This is a genuinely nice property. Multilevel ILU has essentially one tuning parameter, and it moves you along a single curve. Compare that to AMG, where strength threshold, aggregation scheme, smoother, and cycle type interact in ways that are not monotone in anything. If you're tuning a multilevel ILU, start at 10 to the minus 2 and move by factors of 3. Now the other family. Completely different instinct. Additive Schwarz doesn't eliminate anything. It splits the domain into subdomains, solves a local problem on each one, and adds the corrections up. Delta equals 0, no overlap, is block Jacobi, and it's bad, because no information ever crosses a subdomain boundary within a single application. Delta equals 1. Grow each subdomain by one layer of the graph. 31% of the unknowns are now duplicated across subdomains. That duplication is exactly the mechanism by which information crosses boundaries. Delta equals 3. 75% duplicated. Better convergence, much more work per iteration. Overlap is the price you pay for information transfer, and you pay it in flops and in communication volume. 3 ways to add the corrections back. Classical as, restrict the residual to each subdomain, solve, prolongate the whole local solution back, sum. Problem. In the overlap you're adding 2 or 3 contributions, so you overcorrect. RAS. Restricted Additive Schwarz, Chi and Hierarchies, 1999. Solves on the overlapping subdomain, but only writes back the part it owns. No double counting. ASH does the reverse. Restricts the input rather than the output. Panel A. Identical subdomains, identical local solves. As 27 iterations, ASH 32, RAS 19. RAS wins by roughly 30%, and it communicates less. Kander's 2003 paper explains why. RAS is equivalent to the classical Schwarz alternating method at the continuous level, whereas S is not, as fails to converge inside the overlap. The catch, RAS isn't symmetric, so you need GMRES, not CG. Panel B. The overlap sweep. Iterations drop, storage climbs, and the returns saturate around delta equals 2. Going beyond that is almost never worth it. Here's the fact that defines the whole Schwarz literature. I'm holding the subdomain size fixed, 6 mesh cells across, and increasing the number of subdomains. 2 by 2 up to 16 by 16. 1 level additive Schwarz, 15 iterations, 24, 33, 41, 55, 73. Growing like 1 over h. And the reason is almost embarrassingly simple. In one application of the preconditioner, information travels exactly 1 subdomain. To couple opposite corners of the domain you need as many iterations as there are subdomains between them. Add a coarse space, here just 1 constant per subdomain, the Nicolade space, and you get 16, 25, 32, 35, 39, 41. Nearly flat. The theory says it exactly. 1 level gives condition number bounded by C over h squared times 1 plus h over delta. 2 levels drop the 1 over h squared entirely, so 1 level Schwarz is not scalable, and more overlap will not save you. A coarse space will. But be careful about what you just bought. Panel B is a log random coefficient field. Every subdomain contains the full dynamic range. Panel A sweeps the contrast from 1 to 10 to the 8. 1 level RAS, 30 to 446. 2 level RAS with a constant coarse space, 33 to 418. Essentially no benefit. The coarse space fixed the size problem. It did nothing for the contrast problem because piecewise constants simply cannot represent the near kernel of a highly heterogeneous operator. The fix, and this is what GENEVO is to compute the coarse space rather than choose it. Solve a small generalized eigenproblem in each overlap, keep the eigenvectors below a tolerance, and use those as coarse basis functions. That gives you a condition number bound of C times 1 plus 1 over lambda tolerance, independent of the jumps. Billane and co-authors, 2014. And note the amber dashed line. Multilevel ILU, on the same problems, 19 to 68. Elimination is coefficient agnostic in a way that a fixed coarse space isn't. That's a real advantage, and it costs memory. Now the question I actually get asked most. Is the Schur complement in ARMS the same thing as the Schur complement in a pressure solver? Panel A is a Stokes saddle point. Velocity block A, divergence B, and a zero block in the pressure corner. 364 velocity unknowns, 195 pressures. The physical split is obvious. B is the momentum block, C is 0, and the Schur complement is minus B A inverse B transpose. That's the pressure operator. Panel B is that Schur complement, formed exactly. It is dense, 100% dense, because A inverse is dense. That's why nobody ever forms it. Panel C is the cheapest useful surrogate, minus B, times the inverse diagonal of A, times B transpose. Farce. 5 point. It's a pressure Laplacian. That's simple, and it's the operator you actually hand to AMG in a Schur pressure correction setup. And here's the criterion that decides whether a surrogate is any good. Plot the eigenvalues of S hat inverse times S. If they cluster, the Krylov method converges in a number of iterations independent of the mesh. If they spread, It doesn't. Pressure mass matrix, spread of 610. Simple, 65. Least squares commutator, 2.4. Beautifully clustered. And arm-style algebraic dropping of the exact S, at 10%, 555. Look at that last line carefully, because it's the answer to the question. Algebraic dropping produces a perfectly serviceable preconditioner, 15 GMRES iterations, better than the mass matrix's 40. But it does not cluster the spectrum, which means its quality is not guaranteed to survive mesh refinement. That's the difference. CFD replaces S with a spectrally equivalent physical operator. ARMS keeps the entries of S that happen to be large. Same identity, entirely different notion of approximation. Now the part that surprised me when I ran it. I took the raw Stokes saddle point and handed it to my ARMS implementation. It crashed. Zero pivot. Every pressure row has a zero diagonal, so the independent set happily selected pressure rows and B was singular. The fix is one line, and it's exactly ILU Pack's idea. A row may only enter the eliminated block if its diagonal is large enough relative to its row. Rows that fail get deferred, pushed down to the next level. With that line in, the level 0 fine block that the purely algebraic criterion selects is 100% velocity degrees of freedom. Nobody told it about physics. It found the velocity pressure split from the sparsity and the magnitudes alone. So, same identity, and at level 0 on a saddle point, the same split. What differs is what happens next. CFD stops there and substitutes a physical surrogate. ARMS keeps going, recursing on the Schur complement 9 more times. That's also why multi-level ILU is the one method in the opening table that survives problem 4. One more result for anyone doing two-phase flow. Put a density or viscosity jump across the interface and watch the surrogates. Horizontal axis is the jump ratio, vertical is the spectral spread. Plane pressure mass matrix, 610, 626, 795, 4,400, 43,000. It degrades linearly in the jump. The surrogate stops being spectrally equivalent. Now weight the mass matrix by the inverse coefficient, 1 over nu, or 1 over rho for a density jump problem. 610, 514, 514, 515, 515. Flat. Simple, which builds the coefficient in automatically through eigenverse, 62, flat. If your two-phase pressure solve is converging badly, this figure is the first thing to check. The problem is not that your smoother is too weak. The problem is that your Schur surrogate silently stopped being a good approximation the moment you introduced a density ratio of 1,000. Fixing that is a change of operator, not a change of solver settings. Last act. Multilevel ILU versus AMG with an ILU smoother. Panel A, both build a hierarchy on the same matrix. AMG smoothed aggregation gets from 2,300 unknowns to under 50 in 3 levels. Multi-level ILU takes 12. Aggressive projection versus incremental elimination. Panel B, the price. AMG's operator complexity is 1.25. It stores 25% more than the original matrix. Multi-level ILU stores 2 to 3 times the original. That fill-in the Schur complements is not free. Panel C, and on this problem it buys you something. 43 iterations for plain ILU 0, 14 for MG plus ILU, 20 for multi-level ILU. This is the slide that clarifies the terminology once and for all. Panel A, identical AMG hierarchy, same prolongation, same Galer-Kin coarse operators, I only swapped the smoother. Damp Jacobi 237 iterations, Gal-Sadel 166, ILU 065. So the smoother matters enormously. But notice what did not happen. The coarse grids never changed. ILU as an AMG smoother never builds a level. It damps error on a level that was constructed by aggregation. Panel B shows why the smoother can't do the job alone. I take a random error and apply nothing but smoothing sweeps, no coarse grid. Every smoother drops fast for 2 or 3 sweeps and then flattens completely. Jacobi flattens at 32%, ILU at 27%. That flat part is smooth error. It is invisible to a local operator by construction. That's the coarse grid's entire job, and it's why the two components have to be complementary. Whatever the smoother can't remove must lie in the range of the prolongation. In a multi-level ILU there is no such division of labor, because there's no smoother. Elimination is exact. The error comes only from what you dropped. And now the result I'd put on a poster. I've injected 80 very stiff rank 1 couplings into a diffusion matrix. Physically, 80 places where a two-phase interface sits almost on a node, the enriched pressure DOF gets condensed out, and you're left with an enormous coupling between two neighboring nodes. Panel B shows the result. 12 orders of magnitude of entry magnitude in a single operator. Sweep the stiffness from 1 to 10 to the 8. ILU 0, 49, 50, 50, 50, 50. Completely unbothered. Two-level RAS, 33 to 35. Unbothered. Multi-level ILU, 20 to 22. Unbothered. AMG with Gauss Seidel, 26, 45, 150, 2300, and then it doesn't converge at all. AMG with ILU 0, 14, 15, 16, 16, 16 same hierarchy. Same aggregation. Same coarse grids. The only difference between the fourth line and the fifth line is the smoother. Here's the mechanism. A stiff coupling between two adjacent nodes is a local pathology, and it sits inside the sparsity pattern of the matrix. So ILU0 captures it essentially exactly and eliminates it before the coarse grid ever sees it. Gauss Seidel can't. It updates one node at a time, and two nodes joined by a stiff spring have to move together. The error survives smoothing, and the aggregation-based prolongation can't represent it either. Neither component handles it, complementarity fails, and the cycle diverges. So if you are running AMG on a cut cell or enriched formulation and it's crawling, this figure is the reason an ILU smoother is not a nice to have. 6 rules, in priority order. 1. Fix conditioning at the source before you touch the solver. If your interface can sit arbitrarily close to a node, move it, distance modification, cell merging, whatever your code offers. Nothing downstream fully compensates for an avoidable near singular row. 2. On a saddle point, split by physics first. Block triangular preconditioning with a good Schur surrogate, and AMG on the resulting pressure operator. Go monolithic only when there is no good surrogate available. 3. Choose the surrogate for spectral equivalence, and weight it by the variable coefficient. That's slide 17. A density-weighted mass matrix instead of a plain one. 4. If you're using AMG on a jumpy operator, raise the strength threshold. At theta equals 0, everything is strong and aggregation is blind to the jump. 5. ILU is worth far more as a smoother than standalone. 14 versus 43 on the mild problem, 16 versus 50 under cut cell stress. And in a Schwarz method, ILU is the subdomain solver. These are not competing choices, they compose. 6. Multi-level ILU is the robustness fallback and it costs memory. Budget 2 to 4 times the matrix. 1 dial, the drop tolerance. Saad and Suchamol, 2002 for ARMS. Wallofer and Saad, 2006 for inverse-based multi-level ILU. That's the ILU pack paper, and it's the one to read if your matrices are indefinite. Kai and Sarkis, 1999 for RAS, and Gander 2003 for Why It Works. Villain and co-authors, 2014 for GenEO. Elman, Sylvester and Watton for everything about block preconditioning of Navier-Stokes. Tusseli and Vidland for the domain decomposition theory. Zhu and Zikatanov's Act and Numerica article for the unified AMG framework. The code, the figures, the LaTeX formulation, and a written version of everything in this video are linked below. Run it, break it, change the contrast, see what happens. The thing I'd want you to take away, these methods are not competing products. They're different answers to the same two questions, how to split, and how to approximate what's left. Once you can see which question a method is answering, the config file stops being a mystery. Thanks for watching.